Welcome everyone. I hope that you will find this webinar fruitful and helpful. Mostly we will talk about the liquidity providers, the single LP model, the multi-LP model, the pros and cons of the both models, and also the potential challenges that brokers can be facing while switching from one single liquidity providers to multi-LP. And we will also slightly touch base on the points how TFB can help you to overcome those challenges. So please stay tuned. Everyone who don't know me, hi, my name is Lola. I am a head of partnerships for Tools for Brokers. I've been with the company for the past 9 years, I think since 2017. The current position that I'm holding is global head of partnerships. So I'm overseeing all the current partnerships and also figure out any potential partnerships that can be happening between the Tools for Brokers and all other fintech companies on the market. I am based in Cyprus myself. Tools for Brokers also have offices worldwide in London, in Singapore, in Georgia. And our recent baby was born last year. We opened the office in Dubai, which was a very big and strategic move for the company itself. So I think that we will allow still people to join during the webinar, but I suggest that we should slowly jump on the main subject. And the main reason why we all gathered here today is the multi-LP and single LP models. Before we proceed to the webinar itself, I think it's important to emphasize what liquidity in Forex is and why exactly it's so important. Yes, liquidity is very important in the Forex world because it ensures that the trades can be executed quickly and at stable prices. When we speak about the liquidity, we have to keep in mind 2 points exactly is when we're talking about the high liquidity. So when there is a high liquidity, it means there's a lot of people in the market actively buying and selling. Think of it as like a busy marketplace. Everything is moving quickly, prices stay stable, and it's easy to make trades at the price that you want. The easier comparison, because usually I like to give the easiest comparison that could be explained to 5-year-olds. The high liquidity in the easier comparison could be, we can imagine the bus stop. The bus stop, when we have a lot of buses coming at a specific schedule, you don't really have to, fight for your seat because there are a lot of buses coming in. There are a lot of buses available, so you can get your seat. There's no delay in arriving, and you can easily get to your destination without, of course, paying extra. But when there is a low liquidity, it's like walking into a store with almost no customers. Suddenly, you feel like it's harder to buy and sell. The prices can jump around unpredictably. So this can lead to a slippage when you try to place a trade at one price, and because of the delay, can get executed with the price that is worse because the market is constantly moving. And if we go back to our comparison with the bus stop, the low liquidity is like having a bus stop with one bus coming and it's super crowded. You basically need to wait for another bus to come, which potentially can be also overcrowded. And in the end, you might just want to dump that idea and get the taxi because you still need to get to your destination. However, in this case, you are definitely going to pay more. So this is 2 points that we have to keep in mind when we are thinking about the liquidity. And coming back to the Forex, the high liquidity always gives us the stability and smooth trading, while the low liquidity gives you volatility and possible price jumps. The liquidity, as I mentioned, is super important, but where does the liquidity actually come from? And of course, we have to mention that the liquidity comes from it's provided by liquidity providers, by the banks, financial institutions, and prime of primes too, which is the brokers who can provide the liquidity. So things to consider when you are, thinking to work with specific liquidity provider. Not all the liquidity is provided equally, so they can differ based on many metrics. So when we speak about the liquidity providers, you might wonder, what exactly should I pay attention to when I want to work with liquidity provider? Of course, there are many metrics and many tips that you want to consider yourself before working with specific liquidity provider. However, based on my experience and based on the experience of my clients, there are 5 points that I think are important to keep in mind while you want to work with specific liquidity provider. First of all, of course, you have to consider the spreads, because the tighter the spreads, the better it is for traders. So because they get the pricing because they get better pricing for their trades. Wider spreads, usually not so great. It can make trading more expensive. Of course, you have to pay attention to commissions and fees, and especially to hidden fees as well, because of course, we have to keep in mind that when you start working with any liquidity provider, there are deposits involved, there are monthly minimum commissions, there are volume-based commissions, and as well. And potentially there might be some hidden fees too. So these points should be clarified in full before you consider working with specific liquidity provider. There are also swaps, which is we all know perfectly what it is exactly. So basically the swaps are the overnight fees that the traders pay if they keep their position for a specific period of time. Different liquidity providers offer different swap rates. So let's say this would be important if you have a long-term traders rather than the short-term ones. Of course, you have to pay attention to latency too, because latency refers to the time it takes for an order to be executed after it was placed. So the high latency leads to delays, potential price changes, and frustrated traders as well. And this is what we are trying to avoid completely. We want to keep our traders happy. And the fifth point, I think, which is important to pay attention to, is the slippage. The higher the liquidity is, as you remember, we spoke about the high and low liquidity. So the higher the liquidity and the better the execution, the less slippage you'll experience. All of these factors together will affect spreads that the traders see, how quickly they will be executing the trade, and overall, their happiness with the trading activity. So when it comes to choosing the liquidity provider, you have to choose it very wisely and carefully. In my practice, of course, there was a time, it comes to a point when brokers think whether having one liquidity provider is enough, or if they want to grow and consider having more than one liquidity provider. And of course, at this time, they start thinking, what are the actual benefits and downfalls from moving from the single liquidity model, which they get used to, which it's easier to manage, to a bit complex model as a multi-LP model, which also gives you many benefits, but it comes with the downfalls as well. So let's concentrate first on the single liquidity providers, single liquidity setup. Of course, when you just start your brokerage business from the scratch, you definitely think that, and it makes sense actually just to proceed with the one liquidity provider. Why? Because it's easier to set up, and of course it's cheaper because you are dealing with just one deposit, one fee when it comes to monthly minimum charges, and one fee when it comes to volume-based charges as well. However, there are some backfires as well. For example, one of the most, I would say, popular one in the sense of the risk is the no backup switch in case you will have any potential problems with your main liquidity provider. When there's no another liquidity provider involved in your trading activity, if something, God forbid, of course, but if something goes wrong with your main liquidity, you simply don't have a backup flow where you will switch all the trading activity. When there's no pricing, obviously nothing is happening on your server. So having a backup liquidity is super important when it comes to thinking about moving to multi-liquidity model. Of course, you will be facing the latency, because latency can become a big problem if your liquidity provider servers are slow, overloaded, or they are located far away from the trading platform and the bridge server as well, for example. So the market is moving super, super fast. So these delays might affect on how fast the trades are executed. Of course, another issue is as well as a slippage. So with a single liquidity provider, you might see more slippages because you're getting prices just from one source. If that liquidity doesn't have enough liquidity at the exact moment, for example, and order might get filled at the worst price than expected. When the broker is facing these issues, of course, they think, okay, what are my possibilities? How exactly I could avoid these issues? And that's when the multi-LP model comes in place. Of course, when I mentioned earlier, the multi-LP model, it's something that's not necessarily needed from the very beginning when you're just starting your brokerage business. However, we should look at the multi-liquidity as an upgrade, as a way to improve your brokerage business activities, way to provide more possibilities to your traders, better pricing, and etc. So at a time when you feel that, okay, I'm ready to move on the next level as a brokerage company, it's the perfect time to include the multi-liquidity model. Why? Because first of all, as a benefit, you're getting the better pricing. I have to mention here that better pricing might be coming in only if you have implemented the aggregation internally with your bridging tool. Once you have aggregation in place, you can aggregate several pricings from different liquidity providers and aggregate with the best pricing amongst them. You're also reducing your risks because, again, as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have a backup flow in a case backup trading flow, pricing flow, in the case the main liquidity provider is for some reason is failing. You're definitely also going to be having faster execution. Why? Because again, you will be having prices coming in from different sources. It's also good to point out that you will provide your traders more flexibility because when we mentioned earlier, every liquidity provider comes with its own limitations. So we might have a liquidity providers on the market who provide just the forex and CFDs. We might have liquidity providers who can supply with crypto, who can also provide you the weekend trading and etc. So in order to provide wider range of instruments and flexibility in the trading activity to your traders, you also have to consider providing more than one liquidity providers for them. For instance, if you also want to provide and offer exotic pairs, and of course the synthetic symbols can come into place, but you still have to have the pricing for whatever pair of the exotic instruments that you want to provide to your traders. So once you come to a situation where you are starting to feel limited with one liquidity provider in the sense of the instruments, risk management, slippages, and etc., it's time to move to multi-liquidity mode. Of course, as anything in life, any other, let's say, improvement in life, it might potentially come with a downfall, definitely. However, when we speak about the multi-liquidity model, obviously the benefits are bigger than the downfalls. However, we have to also, of course, keep in mind that the multi-liquidity model is way more complex to manage. So unless you have technology already implemented internally that will help you to manage multi-liquidity providers without as less human interaction as possible, that's perfect. It means that you might be facing less complexity in the sense of the managing more than one liquidity provider. Of course, definitely you will be facing higher costs because now you're facing not just with the one deposit and the monthly minimums, etc., but as many providers as you have. So definitely you have to consider that the costs are going to be higher. And potential also downfall is the price difference between liquidity providers. However, as I mentioned earlier, if you have the aggregation in place, the technology that will help you to aggregate the prices and provide you with the bestest prices for the execution for your traders, you are good to go. Also, a good thing to keep in mind that this tool should also help you with the discrepancies because you would want to avoid a situation when your trade is opened on one liquidity provider because it has the best price and it closes on different liquidity provider because at that moment it has the best price as well. So these discrepancies have to be minimized too. And if you want to have more details how TFB exactly manages that, I'll be more than happy to provide you the details right after the webinar. I hope it clears a bit the differences between the single and multi-liquidity model. And to kind of summarize, I would say, when a broker needs a multi-liquidity provider and why exactly he would want it. Of course, the first and foremost point is that you would like to improve your liquidity and the pricing. So as your trading volume is growing and sticking to one LP might not cut it anymore for sure. So by switching to multi-liquidity providers, you get access to more pricing sources, which helps to ensure better pricing and stability and reduces the chances of slippages as well. So more prices, like more options and more reliable pricing for your traders. As I mentioned again earlier, to offer wider range of instruments is also very important because I think your traders might feel limited at a specific point of time. So having a wider range in the sense of the instruments, it's also a great idea. If you would like to handle high volatility in the market events, let's say when the market is crazy, whenever it's a news driven or big economic events, liquidity can get thin super fast. So with just one liquidity provider, you might run into a lot of problems. But when you have more than one liquidity provider, you always have a backup, which is super important, as I mentioned earlier, and you can still get competitive prices and fast execution even during these wild market conditions. So always keep in mind that whenever there are some specific, very important events that will be happening on the market, it's a good idea to have more than one liquidity provider in place. You are able to meet the client's expectations with the fastest execution because overall, the day traders and if you're allowing the scalpers, they're all about the quick execution. So with the multiple liquidity providers, you can improve execution. You can improve execution speed and reduce the delays as well. You'll have more options to choose from. So let's say you can pick liquidity providers that offers the fastest execution at any given moment. You're able to reduce risks, as you know, was mentioned many times, but it's an important point. If one liquidity provider goes down or faces whatever technical issues, it can take down your whole platform, your whole trading activity, and probably you might face losing a lot of traders, which we want to avoid. With multi-LP, you always got the backup feed available. So if one liquidity provider has a problem, the others can pick it up and your trading activity continues to run smoothly. And you're also able to offer better spreads and lower costs for sure. So when you pull in the prices from multiple liquidity providers, you get to compare the spreads and pick the best one for your clients. This ensures that they're getting the best possible pricing. Sorry about that. I hope it also helps to clear and make up, let's say, your mind. If at this point you start to consider implementing more than one liquidity provider, or maybe at any given moment after the webinar. And once, of course, you are thinking to implement multi-liquidity provider and you're working with one LP on the market as of now, you might face the question of how exactly do I implement a multi-liquidity? It's absolutely right thoughts. I think you have to approach this the same exact manner as when you were approaching integrating with one liquidity provider. So the first thing you do, of course, is you choose the right liquidity providers to work with. And for this matter, you can either use the 5 points that I provided to you earlier. And of course, there are many other aspects that you have to pay attention to, such as the reputation of the company on the market. Probably you have common, clients or friends who are using the same liquidity just to get the overall feedback and understanding how exactly they work. So once you settle your decision in the sense of which liquidity providers you would like to work with, the next one, you need to set up the correct internal infrastructure in order for the bridge, the technology that you're using at the time being, to be able to handle as many liquidity providers as possible and without, interrupting and without implementing much of your human resources. So you need to minimize the human interaction overall when it comes to implementing liquidity providers, multi-liquidity providers into your technology. The next thing, once you settled your liquidity providers and you have selected the needed bridge that you would like to work with, then you're setting up the order routing rules. This also can, you also have to pay attention here if your current technology is flexible enough to allow you to execute different orders, maybe different accounts on different instruments to different liquidity providers. Or if you are able to use the aggregation mode, if you're able to provide, for example, synthetic symbols, if you're also able to fight the discrepancies, because I think discrepancies is one of the first things majority of technology providers are facing when it comes to aggregating prices from different liquidity providers. So this is something that you have to pay close attention to when you are setting up your internal technical infrastructure. And of course, you have to manage the costs effectively. By that, what I mean is that even though you implemented several liquidity providers, you still have to monitor and make sure that you are still getting the best prices possible, the best trading conditions possible as well. So even though everything is set up and everything is running smoothly and you're absolutely happy about that, it doesn't mean that you have to just completely lose control over the situation and proceed to different tasks. Time to time, it's good to review back with all the current infrastructure that you have. Maybe there are some changes needs to be done. Maybe some providers need to be deducted. Maybe different ones has to be added. So even by implementing the liquidity providers, still you need to pay attention and have a close attention actually to the fact how much you're still paying, how much you're getting in return, and if there's something that needs to be improved on your side. Moving forward, of course, it's a kind of a normal thing, I think. The potential challenges might be happening and will be happening whenever you will be considering moving from one liquidity provider to many. Let's be honest, you are facing the challenges even when you have one liquidity provider implemented, even if you don't have any liquidity providers implemented at all, and you're thinking to implement them. The challenges will be happening for sure. However, you have to understand how exactly, if you have enough resources or enough technical knowledge or enough technical possibilities to deal with those challenges. Some of the challenges that I think might arise whenever you are going to move towards the multi-liquidity providers setup. Of course, this is a high cost of multi-liquidity providers. So when you work with the multiple LPs, costs can add up quite quickly because each LP might charge different fees for the liquidity, spreads, execution, and managing all these different agreements can lead to increased cost overall. So plus maintaining multiple connections and handling large amounts of data can require bigger infrastructure, leading to higher operation costs. As a solution, it's good to use the aggregator. It's good to have the flexibility in your current bridge provider that will help you to route the trades properly, to route specific accounts to specific liquidity providers based on specific instruments and etc. So pay close attention to your internal technical infrastructure when it comes to implementing more than one liquidity provider. You can also face execution delays, of course, and some technical complexity, definitely. Once again, because it's not like you're handling just one liquidity provider at the time being. There are more things to handle, there are more things to manage, there are more things to think about. However, again, if you have enough resources from a technical perspective, you should be more than fine in managing more than one liquidity provider. And one of the things I think I didn't mention beforehand, but I think we need to keep in mind as well the compliance, because while choosing the liquidity providers and the providers overall that you want to work with, you have to make sure that they're compliant. You have to make sure that different liquidity providers have different standards or operate in different regions. So if your jurisdiction is okay to be, let's say, is compliant to be used with different liquidity providers, or for example, some of the jurisdictions and some of the regulators are requiring you to use more than one liquidity provider at the start. So you have to make sure you are fully compliant with those terms, and your liquidity provider is compliant as well. Once you are thinking to move towards multi-liquidity structure. Okay, so I think, of course, as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be potentially more and more problems that might potentially arise. However, of course, we always happy to share our knowledge, share our experience when it comes to you guys, brokerage companies facing potential issues on potential problems, for example, and you need someone to help you out with the opinion, with the advice, and etc. You are always, free to use our services, to ask our opinion. We will be glad to share our knowledge. And as a conclusion, I think that having multi-liquidity structure, again, it's not a necessity, especially when you just start your operations. However, to improve your slippages latency, to improve your overall experience of your traders, to provide them more instruments, to provide them reliability, to also handle your internal risks by providing the several price feed possibilities in case something goes wrong with your main one. It's a good thing to think about once you start growing, once you start to see that your volumes are growing as well. So maybe, let's say, if you are just starting your business, more than fine to use one liquidity provider. However, please keep in mind that if you want to grow, there should be some changes done. And the first thing I think you should start thinking about is implementing more liquidity providers and more opportunities. That's it from my side. That's it in the sense of my thoughts about this subject. I think that we should proceed further to the Q&A session. Okay, the first question is, how much time do I need to switch to multiple providers? Well, it's a good question. Usually, it solely depends on the providers themselves, because from a technical point of view, the only thing that your tech providers will need is the fixed credentials in order to implement it into the bridge environment. But from the organizational point of view, it completely will depend on your liquidity providers, on the companies that you will work with. So solely depending on how long the onboarding will be taking place, how long they will be taking in order to provide you with the credentials, etc. That's the main idea. That's the main things that you need to consider. From technical point of view, it's really it's a matter of 1 maximum 2 days in order to implement it, to test it, and basically set you free for the live trading. The next question that we have is, what if I start working with the new liquidity provider and they under-deliver? Of course, different situations might happen, and we cannot be 100% sure that with the brokers, the companies that we work with will deliver exactly as they promise, everything that they promise, and etc. Again, before, of course, moving to another liquidity provider, I would at least consider or try to fix the problems with the current provider that I have. In a case it's not possible or it gets to a point of no return, of course, then I would consider working with different liquidity providers. And the process is exactly the same as I mentioned earlier. You have to consider 5 points that I mentioned. The time they will take in order to onboard you as a company, and when exactly they will provide you the fixed credentials in order for your bridge provider to install it internally into the trading activity, and you are free to go for the live trading. And the next question is, what kind of services do you offer to help move to multiple providers? More or less the same. The questions are more or less relate to each other, because from a sense of the services, we provide our flagship product as a bridge, which can connect you to as many liquidity providers on the market as you would like. It has the aggregation possibility. We do help to fight the discrepancies. So please let me know if you would like to know more about this right after the webinar. So basically, yes, the only technical solution overall you will need is the bridge that is flexible enough, that is reliable enough, that is fast enough as well, in order to handle more than one liquidity provider from your side. Okay, I don't think we have any more questions yet. So thank you very much for joining me today. It was a pleasure to share my knowledge with you, and I will be happy to also hear your opinion about the structures when it comes to single liquidity provider and multi-LP. Maybe there is something that we still need to consider, and maybe there's something we can add on to the points that I already mentioned today. So please feel free to reach out to me via my email, the LinkedIn post, and etc. And I'll be happy to hear from you. Thank you very much. Have a good day.